Welcome to the Sacred Child Summit. I'm your host, Kathleen Sherrick, and I'm pleased to welcome today Jocelyn Star Feather. Jocelyn is a visibility and thought leadership coach, a spiritual alchemist, and founder of Sacred Planet. She shares shamanic and alchemical wisdom to guide courageous seekers on how we can co-create a revolutionary new world in alignment with Mother Earth and the vast intelligence of the cosmos. After a successful 15-year corporate career working in finance for major multinational firms, she was thrust into a deep spiritual awakening. It was that awakening that turned her life upside down, and after which she emerged with a powerful understanding of how to use her intuition and her healing abilities, aspects of herself that she'd never had access to before. She dove deeply into earth-based practices, and she has studied alongside elders and wisdom keepers ever since. Today, she coaches and guides visionaries, revolutionaries, and change makers all across the world, guiding them to break free from everything that has held them back so they can joyfully offer their highest contribution to our collective future. One of the favorite aspects of her work is guiding soul-led entrepreneurs to bring about their important message and mission in the world out to a global audience. And she sometimes does that through helping them create their first online conference or summit. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It is truly an honor to be here and to be part of your event. Thank you so much.
Very pleased to have you today. And you're going to be talking to us today about astrology, one of my favorite topics.
Yes, I can't wait to dive in.
Well, we'll start right from the beginning, Jocelyn, because there may be many that are tuning in here that don't understand what astrology is exactly. Is it astronomy? Is it horoscopes? What is astrology exactly?
Yes, absolutely. Well, astrology is deeply tied to astronomy, right? So it's important to know about both of those. And I'll also explain what a horoscope is as compared to those. So astrology is a snapshot of where the stars and planets, the sun and the moon, are at any given point in time. And how we most normally see this used is we look at the snapshot of those heavenly bodies at the time that we were born. And so that is called our birth chart. And it is really beautiful and fascinating how that snapshot of those heavenly bodies at that exact moment in time when you were born will give you clues and keys as to your highest strengths and your deepest challenges in life, and also your purpose and what might be most inspiring for you or what might be hardest for you. And so we can look at that snapshot for our children. And there are many different snapshots that we can actually look at, right? We can look at the snapshot of the moment that we were born. We can look at a snapshot of the time possibly that we were conceived, right? We can also look at snapshots of when we first met somebody, right? So if your child meets a new friend when they're 4 years old, you can look at the snapshot of that meeting, right? So there's many beautiful, fascinating ways that this can be used. Now, you may have heard of astrology in terms of a horoscope, as you mentioned, Kathleen. And this is an interesting thing that's kind of a product of pop culture, right? Where you will see the list of horoscopes in a magazine or an online article, and it will say, oh, if you're a Leo, this is what kind of day you're going to have, or this is what kind of month you're going to have. If you're a Gemini, this is what kind of month you're going to have. And those are very, very generalized looks based usually just on where your sun was at the moment you were born. And the sun does indicate a lot about us. But there are so many more aspects that are a part of who we are that are not included in those horoscopes. Like, where was our moon, right? Where was our Mercury, our Venus? Where were certain asteroids at the time we were born? And so if we are really looking at astrology, it's going to give us a much deeper dive, a much more accurate picture, and a much more really inspiring picture, because it'll be much more true for us than just a horoscope. So what if you've ever looked at a horoscope and found it wasn't true, don't throw out all of astrology, because it's a very simplified and generalized look. Yeah.
I see. And so astrology then is a, it's like a personal blueprint in a sense of either the moment we were born or the moment we get married or the moment
Yeah.
of any significant event in our life. And you said a birth chart, or I've heard it also referred to as a natal chart. So that is something that occurs with the alignment of planets and stars at the time, at the moment that we're born.
Yes. Yes.
And it's
Now,
so,
astronomy, I do want to mention, if you don't mind.
and astronomy, is that what you said? Astronomy. Yes, please tell us. What's the difference and how does this relate?
Yes. So astronomy is what we will see in the nighttime sky when we look up, and also what we'll see through a telescope if we look up. Now, of course, there are scientists who are studying this in very profound ways and learning about the cosmos, and there's quantum physics and whole, all kinds of studies of the universe that are going on that are based on astronomy. Now, astronomy is important for us too, because when we look up at the nighttime sky, for example, right now, and I know people may be watching this interview later, but right now, if you look up in the evening sky, you'll see Venus, you'll see Jupiter and Saturn, right? We can actually see these planets. And so it's really wonderful once you have studied your own birth chart or your child's birth chart, and you know where those planets are in your own chart, then to actually look at them and relate to them as a physical, planet in the sky, right? And to make that connection as well. And so it's beautiful to work with both astrology and also astronomy. So both your birth chart and actually looking and seeing the planets and stars in the sky.
So tell us a little bit about how we can use this information or gather this information to understand our children better. There's so many, I have so many questions around this. You talked about conception, you talked about birth, and let's start for a moment and say, what if you have planned a birth at a certain time and it has to not go, and it doesn't go according to plan, and so the birth is at a different time? Does that, what impact does that mean in terms of astrology? Have you messed something up if you had this all planned out in perfect timing, you think, and all of that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I had an experience with my second daughter where I had to plan a C-section. And so I felt so much pressure with this because I thought, oh my goodness, the date and the time that I choose is going to determine, we want to get into, we don't want to get into a space of thinking that we're fating our child to have some specific fate, right? Because I don't think that's how it actually works. But it's going to be a significant different, group of influences on her if she's born on this day versus this other day 2 days later, right? So it is a fascinating thing to consider. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that whatever happens, right, whenever it is that your child is born, that is the time that they were meant to be born. So if you thought they were going to be born on this day and they end up being born on that day, we have to trust that there's a bigger plan going on here, right? That time and date was actually what was meant to be and is in the highest alignment for their soul, right? And for their life. And that should take some of the pressure off, right? Like if it's a situation like I shared where you have to choose that date and time. But it does make a difference. The moon, for example, is a really important aspect to look at from the very beginning of your child's lifetime, because the moon represents our emotional needs and how we feel safe. So the zodiac sign that your child's moon is in is really important for you to know so that you can nurture them in the way that they most need, so that you can make sure they feel safe and secure in the way that's most important for them. And the moon moves very quickly. The moon moves through a sign every 2.5 days. It goes into a new zodiac sign. So if the day that they're born is 2.5 or more days off from what was planned, or whatever may be the case, that's going to be a very different moon sign, very different emotional needs. I'll give an example of this. Both of my daughters have their moon in Cancer. And Cancer is very much about our home. It is actually the home sign for the moon. So it's about our emotions. It's about how we feel safe, and it's about home. So having a real stable home environment is very, very important for my children to feel safe and nurtured. A child with their moon in Sagittarius, on the other hand, Sagittarius is about travel. It's about different cultures. It's about seeing the world. That child would actually be very happy, right? Much more likely to be very happy to be more nomadic and to be traveling with the family unit, right? Rather than having this stable, secure home that the Cancer moon child needs. So that's just one example of how we can learn about our child's deepest needs.
Those are very powerful examples. And thank you for talking about emotional needs, because this is really such an important conversation that we're all having around attachment parenting, compassionate parenting, connection, and all of this. And emotional intelligence, as we know for many decades now, is really important to understand. So thank you so much for bringing up the importance of the moon. And if there are, so we may know this or see this or become aware of this information in our child's chart, is what you're saying. Is that right? In their natal chart, for example?
That would be in their natal chart. Yes, just looking to see where the moon is in their natal chart. Yeah. Yeah, another aspect to look at is their rising sign. So interesting thing, like, thinking back to the horoscopes that we talked about earlier, the horoscopes are usually based on our sun sign. The sun sign tells basically how are we going to shine our light, right? How are we going to express ourselves to the world, right? So of course that's good to know about your child, but even earlier on, even at the very beginning, once again, of your child's life, when they're a baby, or when they're only 1, 2, 3 years old, you want to look at their rising sign. Now, this is the point where the horizon line was at the moment that they were born, where the sun was rising, okay, at the moment that they were born. And in more ancient astrological practices, people actually looked to the rising sign more so than the sun sign to know the personality of somebody, because the rising sign it's who we naturally are. It's who we cannot help but be. So it's really the first personality that we see emerging from that child. And so as your child begins to crawl and begins to walk and begins to talk, of course, we see these personality traits emerging. And so you can look to the rising sign. For example, a rising sign in Leo, this might be a child that loves to be the center of attention, that you could just see them becoming a performer or an actor or a musician, right? And they just love to be in the spotlight. They probably love to have pictures taken of them. And then, I'm thinking of what would be another rising sign that would be a little different than that. A rising sign, for example, in Capricorn, this might be a child who thinks really deeply about things. They might be much more quiet because they really are thinking and taking everything in and pondering and processing everything before they express it back to you, before they even say a word or even make a move, right? So the Leo child might be just running across the house, and the Capricorn child might be sitting there and just looking at things and taking it all in, right? So it's really good to have this understanding about these natural tendencies that your child has, and then you can support them in that, right? You can help them grow their talents that are associated with that. So really,
thank
really
you for those kinds of examples. And you also mentioned really a verb, fating, and let's talk about that for a moment. Sure. Because there's different ways that this kind of information could be used. It could be gathered and then not used for a while to instead see how your child unfolds. And if you're curious enough, see what they're saying to you through their movements, through their inclinations and those kinds of things. So tell me what fating means. And I think you mean FAT. EING, right? Fating, not fading away into the background,
yes.
But fating in terms of your life's fate. Right. Is this something set in stone, or is this something that unfolds over time? Talk to us what you mean by fating.
Yeah, this is a really important aspect of how we use the birth chart. We use the natal chart. So astrology is not a fate. There are some, unfortunately, it's been used in that way in the past. And I know when I first started studying astrology, I was a little bit afraid. I was a little bit afraid to have my first astrology reading because I didn't want to learn that, oh, you're going to, you're going to die at this age, or or this terrible thing's going to happen to you, 2 years from now. That's what I was really worried about. And I think that some people, certainly have had that experience or carry that concern. And astrology is not meant to be used in that way. Astrology shows us a range of possibilities. So for every planet in your chart, there is a range of possibilities for you. And with every planet and with every zodiac sign, there is a high way of expressing that. When I say high, I mean, the highest expression, right? The most positive expression of it. And there's also a shadow expression, a negative way of expressing that. For example, the sign of Pisces, the 12th zodiac sign, the negative side of this is addiction and depression, right? These very difficult states that as human beings we can enter into. So if somebody has their sun or their moon or, a lot of planets in the sign of Pisces, that's something to be aware of. That's something for that individual to be aware of. We want to make sure to stay away from addiction oriented circumstances, right? We want to be really aware of that if in the individual so that we can make sure not to slip into that lowest vibration of it. But the wonderful side of Pisces, the high expression of Pisces, is a very visionary person, someone who's really connected to their dreams and receives a lot of wonderful messages and insights about their life through their dreams, somebody who's very imaginative, and so this can be cultivated in either way, depending on what we accentuate. So we want to be really aware that every zodiac sign, every planet represents a vast range, right? And so if you have a lot of planets in Pisces, it doesn't mean you're fated to be addicted, or to have, addictive tendencies in your life. Absolutely not. It all depends how you live your life and how you work with that energy. But you might be more likely to fall into that than somebody who doesn't have a lot of planets in Pisces. So it's really good to be aware. So let me know if that answers your question.
Yes.
I like to illustrate it through examples because it kind of, helps it to be really clearer in our minds how we perceive that.
Oh, absolutely. Examples are extremely helpful. And so it occurs to me, it occurs to me that relationships between mother and child, father and child, child and family, child and siblings, that these things can be also enabled or informed through astrology. Would that be a different kind of process, or tell us how we might understand relationships better by using our own astrology?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we look at the relationship between two people, it's really beautiful because we can see what I like to call the soul contracts, right? The ways that we're meant to help each other. And we can also see potential challenges or, difficulties or personality clashes that might arise too. There are two different ways that we can look at the charts to see a relationship. Okay, so the first way is called a synastry chart. And that is where we take the birth chart of one person and we just basically put over top of it the birth chart of the other person. So the two charts are just lined up with each other. So what you will see when you do a synastry chart is, for example, I'll give you actually a real life example. My daughter's moon in Cancer, when I put my chart over top of hers, my Jupiter is on her moon, right? Because my Jupiter is at 25 degrees of Cancer and her moon is at 25 degrees of Cancer. So we can see there's this alignment between my Jupiter and her moon. So that's very interesting. Jupiter is the planet of expansion and growth and optimism. And the moon, as I mentioned, is the planet of our emotional needs and how we feel safe. So that's an interesting dynamic that tells a bit about our soul contract. And what one interpretation of that is, as as the mother, as I expand and grow in my own abilities and knowledge and wisdom about the world, I will be helping her be nurtured and feel more safe in the world, right? So that's very interesting. So where the planets line up in that way, we see the soul contracts. Now there could be.
So in that scenario there, and thank you for the example, in that scenario, your Jupiter is helping her moon.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. My Jupiter is helping her moon, but her moon is also helping my Jupiter. Right. It goes both ways.
Oh,
it goes absolutely always goes.
How do you mean that?
So in the other way that we look at it, then looking at how the moon is influencing my Jupiter, there again, as with all of these, there's a range of interpretations. But one way of looking at it, and I apologize for the background noise there, is that if she feels safe, okay, or the more that she feels safe and nurtured, the more that I am able to grow and expand, right? And both of those absolutely make sense as mother to daughter and daughter to mother. We're both helping each other. Now there can also be difficult aspects that show up when we put the two charts together. So for example, if my Saturn was on my spouse's Mars, for example, that would be a very difficult aspect. Saturn and Mars are considered the two malefic planets. They're the ones that can kind of bring us the most difficulty. There's planets like Venus and the moon that bring a lot of joy and wonder and love, right? And comfort, right? But there's other planets like Saturn and Mars that bring more conflict or making things really hard or making things take longer. So if somebody has one person's Saturn is conjunct the other person's Mars, that could indicate, there's a high risk here of arguments, conflict, one person maybe holding another back and not letting them move forward. That's more of a Saturn influence. So again, it's good to know these, because if you're married, if you're two spouses that are married and you know that you have this Saturn Mars conjunction, you can build it into your relationship to always come back to a peaceful, loving place with each other and not let those malefic energies, take over.
And by malefic, you mean more negative, the negative aspects of it?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that's an example of how synastry charts work. We put the two charts together and then we see what lines up, what planets are conjunct from one person to another. The other way of looking at relationships is called a composite chart. And this is a very different look. So the composite chart takes the two charts and merges them into one. So this really tells how the two people will operate together in relationship. It shows us the two as one. And the way it does that is, so let's say this was for me and my daughter, if we're making a composite chart for me and my daughter, it would look at where her sun is and where my sun is, and it would find the midpoint between those two. And that would be what you see on the composite chart for the sun. It would look at where her moon is and where my moon is and would find the midpoint between those two in the zodiac signs. And that would be where the moon is in the composite chart, and so on for every planet. And so this is a whole other dynamic. It shows that when you're functioning together in relationship, when you are both, coming together and being a family together or doing an art project together or whatever it might be, this is how you will operate. And it will be very different than either of the individuals on their own. So then we would look at, what is the sun? What is the way that we shine together? What is the rising sign? What is our personality when we're working together? What is the moon? What is the way that we need to feel safe? Or what is the way that we feel nurtured when we're together? Now that's especially wonderful to look at in a marriage, to see how the two partners will come together as one, right? Or in a long-term committed relationship. But it can be really wonderful to see as a parent to the child as well, and see how we function together.
Parent to child, siblings, even thinking, a teacher to child. And that these, to have it inform and yet not fate, is such a beautiful notion, because it seems to me that's kind of a fine line that you need to be aware of. Check yourself in a sense that that as we look at a science like this, astrology mixed with astronomy and all, that we don't have an over reliance on it, for example, and say, well, you're just doing that because you're a Scorpio in, in your rising sign or
Yeah.
something like that. And instead have walk that balance of having the child lead us, of having the child unfold before us, and then saying, oh, I see, that's that Scorpio rising. Uh-huh. So I really appreciate the attention that you're giving to be aware of the fating of that astrology does not determine your fate. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a common misperception. Do you have any other suggestions or clues for how we can walk this line of kind of informing ourselves and yet allowing the child to be who they're meant to be without, like maybe having some surprises for us?
Yeah, yes, yes. I love that question. I mean, one thing for sure is we just never want to label the child, right? And that goes in general, but it is kind of easy to fall into with astrology if we're not being really conscious and aware of it. Another example of this is my one daughter has a lot of Virgo and Capricorn, and those are both very detail oriented signs. And so she is so detail oriented. And just as a funny example, I'll tell you, the little Nerds candies that you can get a rainbow pack of Nerds. Well, when she gets a rainbow pack of Nerds, she will organize them by color before she eats them. Right. So this is my beautiful, sweet Virgo child. And sometimes I have to hold myself back a little bit, because I want to be like, oh, you're such a strong Virgo, but I don't want to label her, right? I don't want her to think that, oh, I'm this specific, type of intellect or this specific type of mind, right? So I don't say things like that. But in my mind, I think it's adorable. It's an adorable expression of the Virgo, right? So I'm appreciating her in my own mind, but just not labeling her. So that's one thing we just want to be careful of, is not to label and not to assume too much, not to, say a child has a difficult outburst, and in your mind you're thinking, oh, this is because they have their Scorpio in the 12th house and they're tending toward this kind of, emotional depth and intensity. And you don't want to assume they're always going to be like that, right? You don't want to make that assumption, because that's kind of like a negative side of Scorpio. But they actually also have the ability to express the highest side of Scorpio, which is really very magical ways of thinking. A child with strong Scorpio might be, really like looking for unicorns and fairies all the time. And that's wonderful, right? Like exercise that imagination, let them also experience those magical realms. So especially with the negative side or the shadow side of a sign, we don't ever want to assume, or especially we don't want to label them with something that's like saying, oh, you're always going to be this way. That's really,
because it might inhibit their ability to work through it or overcome it, and it might inhibit our ability to actually see bigger for them.
to even perceive bigger possibilities for them, right?
And along with that, you talked about that astrology and where the planets and stars, and you even mentioned asteroids. I think you said asteroids. So really, where the asteroids are, that makes a difference.
That's a whole other fascinating branch that we could go into, and when I do readings for people, there are certain asteroids that I will always pull up because they reflect so accurately these certain parts of us.
Interesting, very interesting. And you mentioned that this can help inform our higher purpose. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So there are a few key pointers in every birth chart that can give you some indications about your purpose, right? And so we can look at this and get a clue as well for what our child's natural talents that are going to lead them toward their purpose are going to be. And then we can help them to strengthen those talents. So the two main things that you want to look at in a birth chart for someone's purpose are, first of all, their north node. So the north node is, it's a little complicated. I'm not going to get into the full calculated explanation, but it depends on, it's based on the nodes of the moon. So it's based on the movement of the moon over time. And so the North Node, wherever that is in our charts, it indicates the direction that our soul wants us to go in this lifetime. Okay, so it's very much connected to if we feel we have a soul's mission, a soul's purpose, this deeper longing to change the world or to help people in some way, right? That will be indicated by the North Node. And so that's a really wonderful place to look to get some clues about your child's purpose. I'm just thinking about an example, you know, coming back to the Leo archetype, the Leo zodiac sign. If a child has their North Node in Leo, they very, very likely are going to someday be, you know, performing on a stage in some way or very visible to the world, right? Sharing their voice, sharing their message in some way, maybe be an actor or an actress. So it's really important to know, so that then if you know that and your child, for example, maybe wants to join the theater group in school, right? Or wants to put on plays for you when they're 3 years old, you can just encourage that with all of your heart and soul, because you'll know, oh, wow, this is really key for where they're trying to go in this lifetime. So you can encourage that, support that, and just wholeheartedly support them in pursuing it. And another piece to look at is the midheaven. Now, the midheaven is called the angle of career. And this is a degree that is generally going to be somewhere around 90 degrees away from, or it's going to be basically square to the ascendant. But again, I'm not going to get into all that, the detailed calculations for that. But the midheaven is considered the angle of career. So this is pointing toward the highest contribution that this person will make, you know, is pulled to make in this lifetime. So you can see it's very tied in with their soul's purpose, but it's a little different. It's a little more career work oriented rather than soul's mission. Now, sometimes those two are working together, you know, sometimes those two are aligned. And of course, that's wonderful and very fulfilling when that happens. But, you know, if the person has a midheaven in Libra, for example, Libra is the zodiac sign of relationships and diplomacy and keeping things fair, right? Really looking at all points of view before we make a decision. So if somebody has a midheaven in Libra, they might be a diplomat that travels between countries and helps people to find, you know, peace agreements, or they might be somebody that's working for peace in the world in some way, or they might be helping couples to relate to one another, you know, positively, right? They'll do they're very likely to, if they're following their heart and soul, they're going to be really finding a career where they can help people to be more peaceful and fair with one another and relate well to each other.
Would this also be a child perhaps that then at age 3 is saying that's not fair?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
That's not fair. You have more than me.
Yeah. I mean, that could be a rising sign in Libra, because again, the rising sign is what shows up earliest, but it could also be a midheaven in Libra. They could be starting their career very early. Yes.
So if we have a child that is expressing something like that, we can think ahead perhaps and say, well, if they're expressing part of this as their higher purpose, let's not get too bent up or wrapped around the axle at this moment. They may be expressing, in fact, something that could turn out very beautiful in the future, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. And they may have a real need to express that. It's like such a core part of them to want things to be fair, to want all sides of the equation to be considered, you know. So then again, you want to support that, nurture that, and let them encourage them in expressing the positive aspects of it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And so you've given us some examples, so many beautiful examples of how to use information. How do we gather this information in the first place? Is this something that we can look up ourselves as parents or as educators and those kinds of things? Or what's the best way? Do we need to talk with an astrologer? What are some options that we can have for gathering this information about our children and ourselves?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you can pull your own birth chart or your child's birth chart for free, and you can check it out and just see what you find, see what stands out to you. If you go to astro.com and put in your birth info there, you know, that's a great place to start. That is free. But it is a lot. It's a lot of information. If you haven't studied astrology, if you're not familiar with it, it's a lot to take in. And of course, there are so many nuances. You know, somebody with a sun in Leo and most of their other planets in Virgo is very different than somebody with the sun in Leo and most of their planets in Cancer. You know, that there's just many subtle differences. So I do recommend talking to an astrologer, somebody who has really studied this and can help you to understand all of the nuances of it.
And are there also, Jocelyn, charts that can give you a time for a certain time period? For example, let's say for your child between ages 3 and 4, or for the next 2 months, or, you know, those kinds of scenarios. Is that a separate kind of chart?
Yeah, well, you bring up something very interesting here, which is what's in astrology considered rites of passage. So there are certain things that happen around the 2-year mark, because this is the Mars return. Now, this is the time when Mars, as it's transiting the sky, is going to come back to where Mars originally was when your child is born. And the Mars return is a time where there are a lot of temper tantrums. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of emotions being expressed, right? Very interesting. Then at 4 years old, we have the, well, this gets into an asteroid. We have the Ceres return. Okay, Ceres, Ceres is what connects us to our mother. Okay, Ceres is another word for the goddess Demeter. And the story of Demeter and Persephone is key to the Greek mythology. So in any case, where the Ceres asteroid is in your chart, the transiting Ceres comes back to its original point when we turn 4 and when we turn 8 and when we turn 12, right? Every 4 years. So this is a time when our connection with our mother comes up and is really important. So for a 4-year-old child, that is often when they're first heading off to preschool or maybe daycare, and will have to deal with separation from the mother. So there are these certain rites of passage that occur. At 12 years old, we have our first Jupiter return. And that's a time when we really begin to expand and grow into the fullness of who we're going to be as an adult. We begin to first get a kind of a feel, a sense, a taste for that, right? And that's a big time of change in our lives. So again, there's so much more here. You could, I don't have a specific website to send you to for that. I'm sure you could Google that, you know, planetary rites of passage, and see what you find. You know, I'm sure there are charts for that online. Another really good thing you can do if you want to research this on your own is to pull the birth chart. And so let's say you see that the sun in the birth chart is in Virgo in the 5th house. You can Google sun in Virgo in 5th house, right? And it will tell you the basic personality traits of that. Now, that's not taking into account all your other planets. It's just looking at that one aspect isolated. But you could do that for each of your planets and learn a lot. You know, there are still more deeper nuances that an astrologer could tell you about how those are, you know, in square, you know, 2 planets might be in square to one another, other planets might be in a trine to one another, and so on, that you're not going to see that way. But it would give you a lot of clues about the, you know, the planetary placements.
Very interesting, very interesting. And when you're talking about kind of the nuanced difference between the soul's purpose and the career purpose, and that they may be similar and they might entwine and they might be separate, it occurs to me that even understanding what the challenges may be in those areas can be helpful. And not necessarily in terms of, as you're saying, these are not challenges that are a given, but
Yeah.
if you have things perhaps that your soul may be intending to encounter in this lifetime, that is not always, you know, joy and celebration, there might be some comfort in knowing that it has a purpose.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And again, the difficult places in our chart are usually where we will see Saturn or Mars, or where 2 planets are square to one another or opposing one another. And that will show up with a red line when you pull your chart. So it will stand out. So those are, yeah, it's really good to know that, like, this is part of the plan. This is part of what we came into this life to experience. And usually it indicates a place where we're meant to heal ourselves so that we can then help others to heal. in some way, especially if it's tied to the North Node or the midheaven, that angle of the soul's purpose or the angle of career, right? Any healing we need to do around that, then we can turn that around and help others to heal. One other place to look for is where your Chiron is. Chiron is an asteroid that indicates where we come in wounded and need to heal in order to be the healer or the teacher as we.
Wow, that sounds powerful. That sounds powerful.
Yeah.
That sounds
Okay.
powerful. And Jocelyn, this has been so informative today. You've been able to present this, I think, in enough of a straightforward, direct kind of layperson's perspective and layperson's terms that I really appreciate that. And is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, well, I do, I do offer astrology readings. If anybody's interested, you can come to my website, which is so WEARE, sacredplanet.com, and just go to readings and you can see what's offered there. And yeah, I think, the most important message to take away is just to know that we're not fated, right? Our astrology is not our fate. It is a vast range of possibilities, and we can learn from our birth chart, and we can very consciously work with this to make sure we're always striving to express the highest version of each of those planetary aspects. And life becomes really inspiring when we become enmeshed in that bigger story of who we are and how we're connected to the stars and planets. I find it a really beautiful way to move through life.
I absolutely agree with you. And thank you for also illuminating that there's always a purpose and a plan and a reason for something to be showing up in our charts and that kind of thing, because it informs us and it gives us information to move forward. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Jocelyn is offering a free gift to our audience today. Jocelyn, would you mind telling us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to share this free gift with everybody. So this free gift is a video presentation, and it is called Venturing into the Great Cosmic Ocean, Awakening the Starry Knowledge Within You. So it's a really beautiful presentation that I made on video, and it includes a meditation practice, and it's kind of a deep dive into the imaginal realms and cosmic consciousness, and looking at our purpose as related to the larger cosmologies and mythologies that are shown in the constellations and the stars. So it's really beautiful, really, really fun. I hope you will all go and enjoy that free gift very much.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. For more information about Jocelyn and all that she shared with us today, see the links that are accompanying this video. Thank you so much, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Kathleen. It was such a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you to everybody out there for listening. I hope you received so much.